So today we have this story about great mercy. Now, one of my favorite Disney movies, because I grew up in the era where it was actually Disney and not Pixar. But my favorite Disney movie where I cried very, very hard was The Lion King. Lion King is such a good movie. And so Lion King, if you guys know the story, obviously know the story. I hope you know the story. If you haven't, our fall hangout is going to be watching Lion King together, okay? Just kidding. But Lion King, where, right, like Uncle Scar kills Mufasa, so sad. But then blames Simba, who's a little lion cub, and he thinks it's his fault. So he runs away, lives for years apart from his family, racked with guilt, like so much shame. And then he comes back and finds out that it was indeed Uncle Scar who killed his own brother, Simba's father. And so this is the scene, if you go to the next one, right, where he's cornered him, and Simba's now a big lion, so he's not a little cub anymore. And he could truly, like, kill Scar, and it would be technically, like, eye for an eye, right, like the right thing. And we see that Uncle Scar begs for mercy, and Simba, in that moment, gives him mercy and says, I'm not like you, and so you can leave now. I'm not going to kill you, but you can leave. And so this idea of mercy truly feels countercultural in our world, right? When someone does something wrong to you, what do people tell you to do? Fight back, right? Like, suck them a good one, you know? Like, you might have gone hard, but did you get the last punch? Or whatever it was, right? Or in our world, online, cancel culture, there's so much that we have in our culture that is actually very counter to mercy. But mercy is at the very heart of God's character. If God was not merciful, we wouldn't be here today, right? If we've experienced his mercy in Jesus, we can extend it to others. And so here in our 4th volume on Foolishness versus Wisdom, we started our unit 2 weeks ago on King David. And last week we saw the epic battle between David before he's king and Goliath. And we saw that everything belongs to the Lord. Every battle belongs to the Lord. And today we see that Israel's chosen king, whether it's Saul as the bad king currently or David as the up-and-coming king, we see that the chosen leader is also God's, whether good or bad. And so here in 1 Samuel 24, a lot has happened since David and Goliath. And here today, a lot has actually happened. There's a lot of context that hasn't happened, that we haven't seen yet. And so scripture, the most important thing when you read scripture is what? Understand the context, culturally, historically, what's happened since we've last seen David, okay? So David defeated Goliath, right? And he quickly rose to fame. Got put in high positions of power in Saul's army. And so he would go out and fight these battles. And he was like the handsome young soldier winning all these battles. And so when they would come back into town, they would have these like victory parades, right? And so the women would sing this song, Saul has slain thousands, but David has slain 10,000s. So imagine you're an old crotchety guy, you're the king, you're the first king of Israel, right? But people are singing all these praises to the new guy, the new kid on the block, the rookie who is taking over your fame, okay? Saul grows jealous of David, but has this weird relationship with David where he also needs David and wants David to be with him, but then gets jealous as David gets closer and David gets more successful because God is with David. And so Saul's jealousy turns actually literally deadly. And he tries to kill David multiple times, okay? Like spear, like literally at him, like multiple times of trying to kill him, to the point where Jonathan, Saul's son, who's David's close friend, tells him, you have to leave. You need to flee from my own dad. You need to leave. And so at this point in 1 Samuel 24, we don't know exactly how long it's been, but David's basically a fugitive. He's a wanted man. He's been on the streets, literally, out in the caves, hiding from Saul. At this point, potentially for a couple of years. Can you imagine David? He's the one that was anointed to be the next king, right? Has been obedient to God all this time. Can you imagine what he's thinking? God, you anointed me to be king, but I'm literally on the run. His wife, so Saul gave his daughter to be David's wife, was given to another man. Like, can you imagine what you're experiencing if you're David? On the run, no shower, like with a bunch of dirty men in caves, your wife's taken away, given to another man, your father-in-law is hunting you down, you've done nothing wrong, and you're supposed to be the next king? You're the Lord's anointed? Like, what is going on here? But in a moment of extreme irony, in the very cave that they're hiding in, Saul comes in to do what? To go to the bathroom. That's what he's doing, okay? Saul's going into the cave to pee. That's literally what he's doing, okay? There is no more vulnerable space to be in than to be in a cave peeing and then to have someone come in and stab you behind the back, right? There is literally no more vulnerable position than that. But in all this irony, here is Saul. Literally stepped into the and there's multiple caves. There's just one cave. There's multiple caves in that En-Gedi area. What are the odds that the one cave that David and his men are like ready for battle in is the one that Saul steps in to pee? Okay, what are the odds of that? If you were David and this man's been hunting you down as an innocent man, what would you be thinking? And literally, as we see, Saul steps in. David's men, who they're also tired of this too, right? They're like, we signed up because you're the next king, but man, we did not think we'd be wandering around for years in the wilderness. They're like, David, if we see in verse 1-4, David, this is your chance. This is your chance. The men said, this is the day, not just your chance, that the Lord, they pull out the God card. They're like, yo, God is the one who's literally brought Saul. Literally right now. This is your chance. Remember, didn't God say he will give your enemies into your hands? This is the day. And so David, what does he do? He creeps up and he cuts a corner of his robe. Okay? It's like if you could beat somebody, instead of that, you pull like one of their hair. That's like what he does instead. Okay? But afterwards, even after cutting off his robe, so you have to understand, this is like the cultural context, right? So your robe has what's called I can't pronounce it correctly in Hebrew, but it's like the sit. There's like a little tassel that's on the corner of each robe for Hebrew men, okay? And that symbolizes that they are set apart by God. That's one of their symbols. And so essentially what we see is that David has cut off that corner. That symbolizes that you are set apart for God. But so to us, it's like, oh, you just pull the thread, but it's actually kind of symbolizes more than we realize in that culture and the time. And so David afterwards is like, feels so bad. How many of you have done something, you mustered up the courage to do something that you know is maybe not right, but afterwards it eats you alive? You're like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that. And it eats you alive. That's where David is right now. But when we see in verse 5 and 7, this is why he feels this way. He was like, hold on. I heard the men be like, David, David, David. You know, he was like following the crowd. And he was like, wait, why did I do that? Why did I do that? Because even though Saul is hunting me down and he's clearly in the wrong, but I know that God anointed him to be king. And he's a really bad king right now. And I know I'm anointed to be the next king. But who am I to take God's matters into my own hands? Who am I to decide that Saul is disqualified? Yes, the world can see Saul is disqualified. But who am I to think that I can make that call? That I can say that God's anointed king is not fit to be king? Only God can make that shot. And so here we see the first point. All of us at some point in our lives are going to be called to practice mercy. And mercy is often a test. It's not an easy one. Mercy is not easy. So when something in your life feels hard, that's my encouragement to you, is to lean in. Because when something feels hard, sometimes God is actually using that as an opportunity to grow you in an area that you need to grow in. See, obedience to God is tested most when mercy costs you something. Because mercy costs you something. You don't just feel gracious and merciful so you're going to forgive everybody. Like, that's not how it works. Mercy costs God something when he put his son on the cross. And so mercy will cost us something when we're called to extend it. Because David could have sat in his righteous corner and been like, I am vindicated in taking vengeance because of all that he has done to me. And on the outside, that can make sense. Unjustly hunted for years, betrayed, on the run, sleeping in caves, living with uncertainty. He doesn't know when this is going to end. David has an opportunity. Saul is alone. 3,000 men he's mustered against David, alone in this moment, vulnerable. But David holds back. He holds back. Why does David spare Saul? Why does he extend mercy? It's not because Saul deserves it. In other words, why does God extend mercy to us? It's not because we deserve it. Nothing you and I do can ever earn his mercy. Mercy is a free gift. Where instead of, because mercy and grace, how it differs, they're both free gifts, right? But you know what the saying is, nothing is actually free in this world. It costs someone something. It costs God something. Grace is something extended to us. Mercy is where we should have deserved punishment, is withheld from us. Does that make sense? Saul deserved justice here. He deserved punishment. He deserved it. But David held back. He restrained that judgment. Why? Because he was like, this is not my call to do. This is not. David, in other words, feared God more than he desired revenge. Think of something someone has done to you, like the worst thing someone has, well, don't recall it too hard because I don't want you guys to get all re-traumatized. But think about something that someone has done something to you that's really, really hard. Someone has unjustly done something against you, slandered you, gossiped about you, brought you down. Someone in the church who's done something against you, that's the one that hurts the most, right? Your friends, whatever, and if they're not believers, like, okay. But someone in church, someone who's supposed to love you and care for you, doing something wrong to you, mercy is hardest when we feel justified to get even. Mercy is hardest in those scenarios. But following Jesus means resisting that desire to settle the score. Because we aren't called to settle the score. You know, the whole plank and speck in the eye. Don't point out someone's plank in their eye when you've got a speck, or a speck in someone else like when you got a plank in yours. In other words, all of us, none of us deserve the Lord's mercy, his kindness, his grace. And so who am I to say that that person, my neighbor, doesn't deserve mercy either? So let me ask you, who in your life are you tempted to be like, man, they don't deserve any mercy or grace or goodness or forgiveness? Who in your life? Because all of us have at least one person. Maybe it's even yourself, right? The hardest person to forgive might even be yourself. And so we hold ourselves back from God because we don't think we deserve mercy or grace or forgiveness. Who are you tempted to do that to? But instead, God is calling you to show mercy. Not because they deserve it, but because we follow a God who embodies mercy. And so as his people, we embody mercy. How will the world know you are light and salt? How will the world know that you and I are different? There's a very famous early church founder, can't remember who it was, Irenaeus, Augustine, one of them, who says, always, always share the gospel, and if necessary, use words. In other words, oftentimes our greatest witness is not what you say, but how you live. And how you live embodies mercy and forgiveness in a way that the world cannot and does not do. That's how we look different. So here's David. In verse 8, he calls, so Saul leaves, thinks everything's fine. And David's like, hey, Saul. And he's not just like, yo, that's not how he responds to him. He says, my Lord the king. And he bows down. This is not false humility. This is not him mocking him. This is him truly honoring Saul as his king. Because though he's a bad leader, he is still the king of Israel. And so he bows down and says, my Lord, my king, do you see what happened? My men urged me to harm you, and yet I said, no. Even God delivered you into my hands. But I said, I will not lay my hand on the Lord because he is the Lord's anointed. Because he is the Lord's anointed. Verse 11, he's saying, I cut off this robe. This is proof that I was that close to you, but I did not kill you. And this last part of this verse is really important. May the Lord judge between you and me. You know what's scarier than David taking justice here is him being like, the Lord do what the Lord gonna do to you. The Lord avenge and make right. But it will not be at my hand. I will not take what is God's. Only God can execute judgment in that way. I will not take that and be God myself in this situation. I will let God be God. And he will do what only he can rightly do as the right judge, as the right king. But I will not do it. Mercy is not weakness. It is strength under control. Does that make sense? Mercy is not weakness. It is strength that is controlled. Strength that is controlled. When you exercise mercy, it is obvious. There is a mark on mercy. There is something different when we walk in mercy. David honors Saul in a way that he doesn't actually deserve, but he can only do because David has chosen to submit to God as number one. David appeals to God as the rightful judge, not himself. So when we withhold forgiveness, when we withhold mercy, we are actually acting as God ourselves, thinking that we have the right to act as God. But that is not the truth, right? Only God is the true rightful judge. And so mercy is actually not weakness. It's actually trusting that God will do what God is going to do. One day he will come and make all the wrong things right. And so it is trusting that God will do that God will handle justice. That even if on this world, right, evil people seem to flourish, bad people seem to flourish. But the reality is that in the grand scheme of things, in the grand scheme of eternity, that life and that experience is but a moment. And at the end of the day, God will come to make all wrong things right. And so mercy means trusting God to handle justice. It is not weakness, but strength controlled and given to God. And mercy is fueled knowing that we have been spared far more than we can ever spare somebody else. In other words, when you and I are struggling to extend mercy to somebody, because the person that's hard to be merciful to is the person closest to you, oftentimes. Your siblings, your coworkers who don't do their work, or your boss who's really bad leader, or your parents, or your kids, or whatever it is. The person closest to you is often the one that's hardest to extend mercy to. But mercy is fueled by knowing that you and I have been spared much more than we could ever spare somebody else. So mercy is always a test. If you feel like mercy is easy, that's because the Holy Spirit is helping you, or maybe it's not actually mercy, because mercy is really, really hard. It is always a test. It's always going to test you. But without no test, there's no testimony, right? Without no work of God moving in your life, God can't work and move without that kind of opportunity. So mercy is a test, but when we walk in mercy, there's always a mark. There's always evidence of mercy in our lives. And the last thing is that there's always a reward to mercy. Always. Even if you can't measure it in the way the world does, there's always a reward to mercy. Here we see in verse 16, when David finishes speaking to Saul, that Saul surprisingly responds. This is the man who's been trying to kill David, who's wrangled 3,000 men to go after one man. That is not a good use of political funds, okay? But like 3,000 men to go after one man. And Saul weeps and says, "You are more righteous than I." The last sentence, "May the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me. I know that you will surely be king." That next king, I know it's going to be you. Because where I failed in submitting to God, I literally see it happening before my eyes. Mercy has the power to soften hearts and point people to God in a way that often vengeance cannot. Do you know how you win people to Jesus? Mercy. Mercy softens people's hearts and points them to Jesus. Showing mercy does not always guarantee reconciliation, right? I've talked often about forgiveness versus reconciliation. Forgiveness is for us. That's for us. Unforgiveness is drinking poison thinking it's going to kill my neighbor, but it actually hurts us. Unforgiveness is for my good. The Lord wants my heart to be in the right place. But mercy is extending it a little further. That I do not take vengeance where I could and should, and instead I extend mercy. Now that mercy does not always lead to being reconciled with the person, because Saul and David, we will see, they never recover their relationship. Like Saul continues, even though he knows this about David, he continues to walk in his way against God, and David continues to go after God. It does not always guarantee reconciliation, but mercy points us to Jesus and opens the door for that like nothing else can. Like nothing else can. Can you imagine if our generation became known for mercy rather than outrage? What would that look like? What would that look like? What would it look like in our generation that we can extend mercy? Even think about just the Korean church, right? What has the Korean church been known for? Such amazing things, like prayer and warfare, like all the ways that the Korean unique blood has kind of come together with church, and how we have an inheritance as Korean Americans, as people who carry that forward, right? It's a unique heritage that we have. If you think about the Chinese American experience or like the Vietnamese American, like any other Asian experience is not so closely tied to church like the Korean American experience. Korean American is uniquely tied to church, for better or for worse, right? But that is our heritage to carry. But with that also comes so much division, so much unforgiveness, and we are prideful as second gen to think that we can do it better. Our parents didn't set out to divide either. They didn't set out to do that either. And yet, human beings, all of us broken, we need Jesus and to experience that mercy and forgiveness for ourselves again so that we can extend that mercy and forgiveness. But what would it look like for our generation down to embody mercy differently, to be marked by mercy and forgiveness and grace differently? What would that do just in the church? And then take that and go to your schools and go to your workplaces and go to your families. And what would that look like for us to embody his mercy? I'm talking like tomorrow when you go home and you get mad at your sibling or your coworker. What would it look like on Monday at 9:30 a.m. to extend mercy? That's what I'm talking about right there. When someone irks you so bad, you're like, you are incompetent in your whatever it is, to extend mercy to that person. To extend mercy to that person. That is what it looks like to embody Jesus. Because the more you and I experience his mercy for us, we can extend mercy to others. And that mercy is what opens the door for people to experience God's presence through us. Because see, David, though he is a good king, he is also human. And we'll see later in future weeks that he's going to have his own fall. But David also foreshadows Jesus. And Jesus comes to do what David could not fully do. Because like Saul, we were also his enemies. Sin dividing us, separating us from Jesus. And like David, Jesus had every right to pour out his wrath, to take that and be like, you don't deserve reconciliation with God. But at the cross, Jesus showed ultimate mercy. So when you and I have struggles showing someone else mercy, I want you to look at that cross real hard, real hard. That's what you and I have to do. Look at that cross real hard and be like, Jesus, you extended me mercy when I didn't deserve it. So God, help me to experience that again, to remember that again, because I can't do it. I can't do this to somebody else. I can't show mercy. So show me your mercy again. Show me your mercy again. Our salvation is purely paid by mercy. We don't deserve it. And yet he paid the price so that we could have what we don't deserve. So let me ask you again, if you're struggling to show mercy, can I kindly and gently point you back to the cross and say, my brothers and sisters in Christ, let's come back to that. Let's come back to our very example of mercy in the first place. That he is the one who extended us mercy. And so today, I will receive that mercy. Maybe some of you, you know that mercy, but you haven't accepted it for yourself because you feel like, I'm not good enough. I don't deserve this. Maybe that's where some of you are. And my encouragement is to you, friend, you are not God. You are not perfect. No one is perfect. Perfection is not a requirement to come before Jesus. Actually, that's the very thing that maybe is your sin, that you and I are proud and think that we have to be perfect to come before God. My friends, do not wallow in your sin. When you see sin in your life, you are not called to wallow in it. Because what you behold is what you become. And so when you wallow in your sin and when all you see is your sin, don't behold that. Call it what it is. Be like, this is sin, but I'm going to behold Jesus, the one who paid for my sin. Not to minimize it, but to come before the cross and say, I'm going to behold the one that I want to become, and that is Jesus. So I'm going to come right back to the cross. When I fall, I'm going to come right back. Do you know how you measure spiritual maturity? It's not in days. It's not in months. It's in years. It's in decades. Some of you only lived 1.5 decades on this earth, okay? So it's not a lot of time to measure. But Christian life is measured in decades. Over time, am I coming back to God a little faster? What took me 6 months now takes me 3. Okay, that's better. We're getting somewhere. What took me a year to forgive, I could forgive now in a month. Okay, that's progress, my friends. That is how you measure spiritual maturity and growth. That can come back to God, make that U-turn faster. And come back to God. Come back to God. Always the answer is, come back to God. When you can't forgive, come back to God. When you can't show mercy, come back to God. When you're mad at your friend, come back to God. When you think, what's the point of life? Come back to God. All of it is come back to him. When you come back to him, when you behold him, you become more like him. So my friends, today our main point is this. God is merciful, and so we are called to be merciful too. So how can we live out mercy? If you've been shown mercy, you're called to extend it. So if we have a hard time extending it, we got to come back to the cross to experience it again. Mercy in relationships with your coworkers, with your family, with your brother or sister that drives you crazy. Mercy, mercy in all of those relationships. Mercy in leadership. Leaders above you who are bad leaders. Saul was a bad leader. And yet, David extended mercy because he knew this is God's chosen leader, even though he's bad. And God will do what God will do to take justice on this, but it will not be at my hand. Or if you are a leader, how do you show mercy to those that you lead? Mercy as a lifestyle, daily choosing to forgive, daily releasing bitterness, daily trusting God for justice. So here we're going to have some questions up on the front. I'm going to ask Ayang to put those questions up on the front. And you can take a picture of it. But right now, I want you to open your phone, and I want you to open your notes, and I want you to jot down some thoughts. Because as most of you who've been in my EM know, it's not enough for you to hear what God is speaking to you, but you got to digest this, and you got to process this, and you're going to write this down, or you're going to talk about it. Today, we're just going to write it down. We're going to talk about it. But I want you to look and ask yourself, what is one way you've experienced mercy, God's mercy this year? We're going to enter his courts with thanksgiving and praise and say, God, thank you for showing me mercy this year. Thank you for showing me mercy, for bringing me back to you. How can remembering God's mercy towards you change the way you respond to those who've wronged you? Jot down who is one person right now who doesn't deserve mercy, but maybe God is being like, hey, that's the person. That's the person. And you're like, no, man, I don't want to look. I don't want to hear. But God is like, that's the person. That's the person. And what step can you take this week to demonstrate mercy to that person? So jot down those thoughts, because when you write it down, it's one more step that compels you that I have to live this out. What can you do this week to extend mercy and grace? Can I have the praise team come up? If you've never surrendered to Christ, now is the time, my friends, to experience his mercy. Maybe you've known it all your life, but experiencing his mercy and saying, God, I don't deserve this, but I will take this. Not because of who I am, but because of who you are. That is step one. And maybe you need to re-experience his mercy again. Re-experience that again. Say, Lord, maybe it's so hard for me to extend mercy because I have forgotten what it was like to experience your mercy. So God, help me to experience it again. And help me to extend that mercy to others. And help me, Lord, to embody that mercy. So this week, this is my encouragement to each of us. Experience his mercy again. Extend that mercy to others and embody that mercy everywhere you go. Because when we do, God's presence and grace follows us in ways that nothing else can do that.